Welcome, everybody. All right, we're talking today about marriage through history. This is a very, very, very important topic for marriage because something has been very much lost since the beginning of birth control in the 60s. What has happened is, ever since the 60s, when the pill came forward, everybody started breeding with everybody, and marriage turned into a three-ring circus. And so what happened is everybody had to sample everybody else's package. And basically, what happened is the divorce rate went through the roof, and it's never stopped since then. But the bottom line is that people determined very much so that their commitment in marriage was meant to be a negotiation. And that means they would negotiate their contract after they'd already signed the contract. After they've already made the covenant, they're going to continuously renegotiate it through the marriage. And what that creates is enormous amounts of resentment and a lack of respect for each other. And then you have the battlegrounds where they stop having sex, they stop talking to each other, do the passive aggressive thing, they act like children. They do all the wonderful things that their children get to witness, and the destruction of their family is soon to follow. Even if they stay together, it still sucks. But what used to happen is very different. What used to happen that actually worked, and it would work today if people had manners and had any sense of integrity. If that were the case, this is what marriage would look like. I would still have a fight with my spouse, and we would not like each other today. We would not want to even be around each other today. But what used to happen was, you are still my wife. I'm still going to have sex with you. I'm still going to love you. Still going to treat you with great manners. I'm going to give you great regard because you are my wife. Now, you as a person, I probably don't like today too much. I probably would rather you jump off a cliff. But since you're my wife, who I love, I'm going to treat you like my wife, who I love. And what used to happen before the 60s was, this is my husband, who I love. Now, do I like my husband? I think he's a jerk. I think he's terrible. I think he's an awful human being. I think he has no emotions whatsoever. I think all he thinks about is himself. I think he's a pure narcissist. Whatever, whatever. But the bottom line is, you would still go back to the premise that this is my husband who I love. So I'm not going to withhold sex. I'm not going to have a passive aggressive temper tantrums. I'm not going to demand all my victim themes get met. I'm not going to throw Broadway production temper tantrums at any given moment. Now I'm going to realize that I have to treat my spouse as a spouse. I have to give my wife the love that I give a wife. Why do I do that? I do that for my own integrity. I treat her with manners because of my own integrity. I cherish her because of my own integrity, not because of the turd she is, but my own integrity. Now, this is how marriage used to work. And in truth, when people build that bridge to each other and treat each other as the spouse who they love, rather than individualize it into, this is, Bob who's a jerk, what happens is you want that back. You want that treatment. This is my spouse who I love. And since you want that back, you want to be treated like the spouse who I love, and you still continue to get that, you start having more grace for each other. You start resolving things on the bottom that, all the resentments that you have get in the way of you treating the spouse who I love. So you move through your problems a lot faster. You resolve conflict a lot faster. Excuse me, because of that. And it's a very important thing to understand that as a human being, we enter into a covenant, and in that covenant, we may be angry at God, for instance, but we still treat God with the reverence that we treat God. But God does the same thing with us. For instance, when Absalom invaded David's kingdom, Absalom was David's son, he betrayed his father. And after Absalom was killed by David's army and David reclaimed his kingdom, He mourned for his son's death first. This is my son. However, he did not celebrate his army winning back his kingdom until he was told to do that. But the bottom line is that's how God loves us. This is my son who I love. This is my daughter who I love. I may not like her very much today. I may not like him for what he's done, but I still love you. That is what we are supposed to do in our marriage. That is what we're supposed to do throughout life. And that is why manners used to be a very big reminder, and people were held accountable for their manners back in the history of marriage. But we've lost all that with our wokey wokey, liberal, crazy ass people that are grooming us into animals. And that's basically what they want us to be, animals without morals, animals without God, animals who rule each other's lives and tell each other what pronouns we're supposed to speak to each other, what words we're supposed to speak, and be extremely prejudicial against different cultures and different people because that is what's right for them. All right. The psychology of marriage centers on the shift from survival based unions to models of self actualization. And historically, marriage was an economic and a political institution. Today, people view each other as sources of emotional fulfillment, which means we're supposed to have sex every day. Well, no. Before birth control, you did not have sex every day. And if you did, it was oral or it was foreplay, because if you did, you would be pregnant all the time. And unless you're Catholic, you might not be able to afford that. And so people had to be much more creative about their sexual desires way back then. And by the fact that they would treat each other with better manners, they would have more respect for each other so they weren't off, creeping off into pornography or whatever else crap they have to do, or some stupid affairs where they hide it online or hide their identity online. We didn't live in that day and age. People had manners. They were held accountable. I'm not saying bad things didn't happen. They did. But to the extent that it happens now, hell no. We have sunk to the bottom of the bottom of the bottom. I don't think we even know what manners are. I don't even know if we teach manners anymore. I don't think parents do. It's really sad because if we learn to treat each other with manners, we might have more respect for each other and it might change the dynamic of our lives. Higher expectations and greater psychological pressures are happening today on relationships. Everybody wants it to be their victim theme. Oh, you treated me like this. Oh, I heard how you said that to me. So now I'm going to not have sex with you for the rest of your life until you apologize in a way I accept it. People are idiots. Idiots by the way they conduct themselves in marriage, and they teach their children to do it also. You have a responsibility. You signed up for a covenant. You better step your ass into it and treat your spouse with some respect, even if you don't like them. Because nobody you marry, you're going to like all the time. But you still owe it to them to treat them as your spouse, just like you owe it to God to treat God as God, even if you don't like what he did to you. In your mind, not that he did it to you. You probably did it to yourself, but you want to blame God for it, of course, because we can't take accountability for anything. The primary drivers of how humans approach their pair bonding and marriage have shifted over the centuries. First of all, during the Stone Age to the Middle Ages, survival and kinship. Marriage originated as a mechanism for survival, the division of labor, child rearing. Psychologically, it was a practical necessity rather than an emotional one, and binding clans together for mutual protection. That's called survival, and that's what people did. Power and wealth. This was during the feudal times and the medieval periods in the early 19th century. Union was often dictated by family alliances, land rights, lineage consolidation. Love and romance were often found outside the marriage, and these unions were strictly practical. It was about having children. Yes, they had a business deal. Yes, that's how it worked, and they still treated each other with great regard and great respect, even though they would slither off into the great beyond and do their little deeds that they shouldn't have been doing, but they did. And that's how it worked back then. Now, does that mean it's right? No. No, it's not. It's not. Then there was the rise of romantic love. 19th and 20th centuries. And this is where things started to get off the rails. As the Middle Ages and the middle class grew, individuals had greater economic independence, and the psychological motive shifted to companionship and affection. And that laid the groundwork for the modern concept of marrying for love. Oh boy, marrying for love. Well, marrying for love is a 66% divorce rate nowadays. Marrying because families put you together, called an arranged marriage, is a 4% divorce rate in this day and age. I wonder why. Because you have to be accountable in arranged marriages, whereas when you're free range chickens deciding you love each other after you end the honeymoon phase, whoever you're with turns into a ball of crap and you'd rather be with something else because you ain't as sexy as I thought you are. And all our marriage is about is having sex, at least from a man's perspective. And that's about as dumb as you could possibly be. But that's what we do. We marry for love. You are my soulmate. I love you. No, the reason that people do not stay together is they're incompatible. That is the biggest reason. But people can be compatible when there are rules of engagement. If there are rules of engagement, you have a better shot at compatibility because there are guardrails around the way you treat each other. But people don't hold themselves accountable for that anymore. If they did, they would resolve conflict a hell of a lot faster than they do nowadays. Now you got to have a marriage family therapist because back then, if you followed the rules of engagement, you tended to know what the model of marriage and what healthy looked like. We don't know what healthy looks like because we want to write the rules for every single marriage on our own because of our fat little ego. Then there was the institutional era. This was up to 1850. What did this do? It basically focused on survival and shelter because people were poor and by majority they were working their way through life. They maybe bathed once a week. They were stinky, they were ugly, they had no teeth. They were pretty crappy looking, but they did it for survival and shelter. I'm not saying all of them, not all of them. But yes, by majority, most people were poor and most people were in survival mode and they married to have someone else in their life and to have children so they could run the farm. Then there is the companionate era. That was from 1850 to 1965 when birth control happened. These people focused on love, on friendship, on distinct gender roles. Church played a big role in marriage at that point. There were models for marriage that were very, very important. Were they always healthy? No, they weren't always healthy. But what they generally did was celebrate what a man is and what a woman is. And God forbid that happen anymore. We could use a little dose of that. Not that we have to do all the I'm a man and I get everything I want and I'm lazy and the woman does everything and I'm a woman and you must do what I want you to do and you must listen to what I say and you must follow all my prescribed rules that I give you. If you step out of that, there is a mixture of what we could do today with some of what we have done historically that would help marriage. Because we now demand that our partners fulfill our needs for love, safety, sexual attraction, personal growth, modern marriages carry a huge amount of loads of cognitive distortion. You have these things called the all or nothing marriage. According to relationship psychology, people expect more from their marriages than at any point in history. Well, I picked you, so you better follow all the rules that you promised me. You said you were going to do this, 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 and you're not fulfilling your promises. And so I am a victim of you now, and I'm going to treat you as such. This crap is so crazy. But this results in suffocation, where couples tend to demand deep psychological fulfillment, but invest less time and resources into fostering it due to busy lifestyles and due to the fact that they don't treat each other commonly with respect. They treat each other with resentment because you promised me all this and I married you and now you're not doing that. I know. And resentment is just, it sucks the life out of a marriage. Then there's attachment theory. If you understand adult attachment styles, secure, anxious, avoidant, it's become the backbone of marital counseling. The way partners regulate emotional conflict depends heavily on those attachment templates. And a lot of people who had trust issues in their childhood, especially with their turdly parents, have anxious and avoidant attachment. Because the truth is that at least half of the parents in this world today are breeding stock. They are not parents, they're breeding stock. They're breeding dogs, basically. They're there to create a litter. That's about it. They love to have sex, they love to have orgasms, they don't love to raise children. The other 50% is a spectrum, like autism, of a parent. They just, it depends on how serious they take the role, but most of them are not in the center of what a parent is. Most of them are lackadaisical, selfish, lazy, but they care about their kids and they love them. And periodically they get on their hind legs and actually stand up and treat their kids with somewhat respect. And then there's the egalitarian dynamics. Early models of therapy assumed autonomous individuals who merely needed cognitive conflict resolution skills. So modern technology, modern psychology approaches marriage as an interconnected, deeply interdependent system requiring emotional vulnerability and deep empathy. Well, that deepness means that you have to understand that the only reason that you get married is because in this day and age of we marry because we're in love with each other, if you're going to pull that crap off, you have to remember throughout the course of your marriage that the only reason you married this turd is because of how you felt about him. And you have to celebrate that every day of your life by asking each other about how you feel about this, that, the other. Because if you don't care about each other's feelings, you've lost the whole point of why you're married. It's not about how was your day, what did you do, where did you go, who did you talk to. It's about how do you feel about this, how do you feel about that. That's how you have a deeper relationship in this day and age. Through most of Western civilization, marriage has been more of a matter of money, power, survival than delicate sentiments. In medieval Europe, everyone, from the lord of the manor to the village locals, had a say in deciding who should wed. Love was considered an absurdly flimsy reason for a match. Even during the Enlightenment and the Victorian eras, adultery and friendship were often more passionate than marriage. Yes. Now, does that mean I'm endorsing people having affairs? No. But I'm saying historically that people did not always marry because they were in love. Now, here's the truth, and here's something that you need to understand. You can love someone and not trust them. It's likely the love will not grow. However, if you trust the person you're with, the love will grow. So you can have a friend, you haven't seen him in 5 years. You come back together and you trust each other. There's a real good chance that relationship is going to grow. It's really important for you to understand that if you're going to be in a marriage, you have to value trust. You have to respect each other and value trust if you want it to grow, which means you need to make your marriage about celebrating who the other person is, not changing the other person, celebrating who the other person is, even if they're a turd like most people on this planet. We're all turds in some ways and we're all good in some ways. Everybody you marry is going to be filled with good and bad. Your job is to figure out how to be buoyant with what you got, not change it. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come right back and talk about the Antiquity Renaissance period and then move on historically through marriage to see what we can, little kernels we can pick up to learn. So come back. Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're talking about marriage through history. Now, back in the antiquity, the Renaissance, ancient Greece, you know, love is a great thing, but love is honored, especially between women and men, and also between men and men back in Greece. Of course, all the transvestites would love that one in this day and age. But in marriage, inheritance is more important than feelings. Back in the Greek times, a woman whose father dies without male heirs can be forced to marry her nearest male relative, even if she has to divorce her husband first. In Rome, wife swapping was a career move. Statesmanship like Marcus Porcius Cato divorces his wife, marries her off to his ally, Hortensius, in order to strengthen family bonds. After Hortensius dies, Cato remarries her. In the 6th century Europe, political polygamy. The Germanic warlord Clothar, despite being baptized Christian, eventually acquires 4 wives for strategic reasons, including his dead brother's wife, her sister, and the daughter of a captured foreign king. During the 12th century in Europe, marriage is good for loving someone else. Upper class marriages are often arranged before the couple has met. Aristocrats believe love is incompatible with marriage and can flourish only in adultery. This is how warped people got. In the 14th century Europe, it takes a village. Ordinary people can't choose whom to marry. The lord of the manor decrees that all the unmarried tenants, including widows and widowers, marry spouses of his choosing. Elsewhere, peasants wishing to pick a partner must pay a fee. In the 16th century Europe, love is a bore. Any man in love with his wife must be so dull that no one else could love him. During the 1600s in the Victorian area, it's a family affair. Married love gains currency, but for intimacy and passion, people still turn to family, lovers, and friends. 1690s in the US, Virginia wasn't always for lovers. Passionate love between husband and wife is considered unseemly. A Virginia colonist describes a woman he knows as more fond of her husband, perhaps, than the politeness of the day allows. Protestant ministers warn spouses against loving each other too much or using enduring nicknames that will undermine their authority. In the 18th century Europe, love gains ground. In England and in the salons of the Enlightenment thinkers, married love is gaining credibility. Ladies' debating societies declare that while loveless marriages are regrettable, women must consider money when choosing a partner. In 1840 England, virgin lace. Queen Victoria starts to trend by wearing virginal white instead of traditional jeweled wedding gowns. And boy, was she a big woman. Historically thought of as the luster of sex, and by the way, she had a lot of kids. Women are now considered chaste and pure, and as a result, many men find it easier to have sex with prostitutes than with their virtuous wives. In the mid 19th century, honeymoon suite for 3. Honeymoons replaced the older custom of bridal tours in which the newly married couples travel after a wedding to visit family who could not attend the ceremony. Even so, many brides bring girlfriends with them on their honeymoons. 20th century, we worship the couple. Intimacy shrinks to encompass just two people, monogamy, and love becomes the only reason for marriage. So in the 20s in the US, you know, how Saturday night began, dating was the new craze back in the 20s. Of course, people are drinking a lot of liquor back then. In restaurants and cars, away from the oversight of family, and the popular culture embraced sex, but critics feared that marriage was on the rocks because of that. So what they do? They went through prohibition after water, public water became came forward. Now that you have water, you don't need liquor because liquor has always been the human race's water. No wonder we've been crazy for so many years. In the 50s, in the US, marriage is mandatory. Marriage becomes almost universal, and the nuclear family is triumphant. 4 out of 5 people surveyed in 1957, believe that preferring to remain single is sick, neurotic, and immoral. And in the 70s, well, now that you got more than just rubbers, all you need is love. Self sufficient women and changing societal rules mean marriage is no longer obligatory. Women could have who they wanted, men could have who they wanted, and they could just breed like rabbits. And boy, did they. Quarreling couples split up rather than make do, and divorce rate skyrockets because people lost their manners. They thought of their sex organs more than their manners, and they thought marriage was now about sex. And if you can't have sex, you can't be married. Why would you be married if you can't have sex? Boy, oh boy, did we get things backwards. Today, now we got bridezillas. And boy, do we have them now with these stupid progressive, crazy, pink haired nutballs. Marriage is the ultimate expression of love, leading gays and lesbians to seek the right to marry, but also encouraging couples to cohabit until they are sure about their soulmate. So let's just shack up for 5 years, and that should teach us whether we want to be married. Marriage rates fall, but the fantasy of the perfect wedding is a bit ubiquitous. So the perfect wedding is more important than the marriage itself. People are batshit crazy nowadays. Couplehood has been, from the dawn of human history, the primary social structure of our species. And it's given, and by the way, you know, these days, a man is not even close to the resemblance of what a man has been throughout the course of history, and a woman is not even close to what a woman has been throughout history, at least based on societal rules that we currently operate now that Joe Biden was in office for so long and all the crazy transvestites took over our government. But it's given rise to and our school systems. It's given rise to larger structures of family, community, society, culture, civilization. We're talking about couplehood. But the interest in helping couples improve the quality of their relationships is a very recent phenomenon. What help couples got in the past came from their families, came from social institutions, came from the church, came from religious institutions. But given to what happens in the home determines what happens in society, and given the personal presence of conflict and violence between partners, among groups and cultures, we can conclude that help was not very helpful. Yes, family secrets. Yes, there was a lot of abuse. Yes, there was a lot of molestation. Yes, there was a lot of rape. Yes, there was a lot of trauma that has happened historically because of the way marriage operated back then. And families were patrolling families, and churches were patrolling churches. But then when they get a dirty little secret, they would stick it under the rug and nobody would ever talk about it. You know, a lot of these people, crazy ass people, when they discovered how to make film, the Germans came over here from Germany and brought pornography with them, and all of a sudden there was these little farms where people would bring their kids, and people would pay to have their kids make films while they have sex with them at 5 years old and 4 years old and 3 years old. Yeah, it's sickening. That's what people did. But the bottom line is it correct? No. No, there were a lot of problems historically back then. But respect for each other was a quality that we do need to integrate into marriage today. The best thing a society can do for itself is to promote and support healthy couples. And the best thing partners can do for themselves, for their children, for their society is to have a healthy relationship. But that means that even if they don't like each other, they have to still learn how to treat each other with respect. Treat each other under the contract you signed and the covenant you signed, and that is the respect that I married you and you married me. We need to go back to being a husband and wife in respect. Then there's this radical position of shifting focus from person centered needs to the needs of their relationship. And the transformation of society has been the making only in the last 25 years. Prehistoric couples formed a pair bond for the purpose of procreation and physical survival. And that all changed about 11,000 years ago when, according to the same body of research, the hunters and gatherers learned how to grow food and breed animals. No longer having to search for food, they settled down into small compounds and villages, and the concept of property that had to be protected arose. And this concept may have applied at first only to animals and crops, but since children and women also needed protection, the concept eventually extended to include them. And the second version of couplehood, the arranged marriage, was born. And it had nothing to do with romantic attraction, personal needs, or mature love, and everything to do with social status, economic security, political expedience. What it had to do with was safety and survival. The next incarnation of marriage began in the 18th century with the rise of Europe in a democratic political institutions, which argued that everyone was entitled to personal freedom, and by extension, the freedom to marry the person of their choice. Boy, did that let the cows out of the barn. The door to marriage was increasingly romantic love. Boy, do we make great decisions when we're emotional, don't we? Rather than parental dictates. And this shift gave rise to personal and psychological marriage designed to meet personal rather than social and economic needs. So I can marry whoever I want, even if they're poor, even if they're stupid, even if, just so they have a nice ass or great tits or whatever, or, if they got a big schwanger, that is the most important thing. That's got to be the reason to marry. Until Sigmund Freud's discovery of the unconscious and the founding of psychotherapy at the end of the 19th century, it was little guessed that our unconscious minds are deeply involved in our personal choices, and our past interpersonal experiences can have a very powerful impact on our present adult relationships. So, what we are attracted to and what we're compatible with may be two different things. God forbid. Now, marrying out of romantic reasons may not be the most rational thing you do. But are we doing it? Yes, we do it. And then we breed. And then our poor kids have to look and watch us be pure animals with each other, act like idiots, act like 2 year olds, and destroy their lives, destroy your children's lives because you're not building a foundation for survival. You're building a foundation for your penis and your vagina. Not a great idea, but that's what people do nowadays. The partner we unconsciously choose is dauntingly similar, warts and all, especially all the warts, to the caretakers who reared us. Help for couples was expanded from traditional, religious, and family oriented sources to an emerging mental health profession whose members have varying degrees of training and competence. And boy, is there a lot of varying degrees of competence in this field. The early models of marriage counseling were based upon the assumption that couples consisted of two independent, autonomous people who could use their learning capacity and cognitive skills to resolve their differences by regulating conflict about their differences. This was helpful to some couples whose issues were not so difficult. But for others, the conflict resolution process was a failure because people were too stupid to catch on to it and too stubborn to follow the rules. So the more difficult couples were advised to engage in in-depth psychotherapy to work through their long-standing personal problems, independent of the relationship, to separate from each other with the assumption that when they came back together, free of their personal neuroses, they could meet each other's needs, current and past, and create a satisfying relationship. Well, the biggest issue and the biggest hurdle that you have to get through in marriage counseling today is people's level of commitment. Marriage is a full commitment. It is not a try, but people are so self-centered these days with their little particular needs that they have to have, their little attachments that they must have, that what happens is their level of commitment depends on how much do you cater to my ugly ass when you're married. And it's kind of sad. It's kind of sad. We expect our partner to cater to us. No, that is not why they're there. They are there for both of you to create a life together, which takes work. It takes commitment. And it means that you have to treat your spouse as your spouse, not as Fred or Barbara. The bottom line is that commitment is everything to marriage. People do not do well in marriage therapy when they are not fully committed to their marriage. People do really, really well in marriage therapy when they're committed and they just need to figure out how to make it work. Half-ass committed people spend a lot of money in marriage counseling without ever going anywhere. And what do? They blame the counselor. They don't blame themselves, they blame the counselor because of their own half-ass commitment. And they'll spend thousands of dollars on their half-ass commitment, expecting the therapist to create some miracle way to get them together. But if they're not committed to be together, they're not going to be together. There's no way you can fix it. They're not going to do anything that therapy brings up. The narrative has marriage. We think today marriage is about us, me, and if it does not provide you with satisfaction, its breakup is justifiable no matter the consequences for others, even the kids. So if I'm not happy because I don't like the way you treat me, I don't like who you are, I don't like, I can destroy our children's lives because my needs aren't going to be met. And that's what we do all day long, every day. That's why divorce is a multi-billion dollar industry. Why? It's actually a multi-trillion dollar industry. Why? Because two lawyers, all they have to do is get you angry at each other, and you will pay whatever it takes, no matter if it's your college education of your children, to take it out on each other in front of an audience people who could give a rat's ass about who you are, what you're about. They don't care about your stupid victim themes. Divorce is about your children. It's not about your Broadway productions. But you never know who you marry until you divorce them. In the past 20 years, these insights have become the theme of the incarnation of marriage, which is the conscious partnership. That is what we are looking for. Now, that does require a deeper friendship, a deeper respect for each other. But that means that you have to have bandwidth, you have to have empathy. And if you live in Seattle, where I live, where all the autistic people live, they don't have empathy. So they're multi-billionaires who divorce all the time unless they are born here with their families and they got their little families and they all stay together no matter how miserable they are, even in their autistic little ways of living, in their nice little houses, and you think they're doing really well, but actually they're a bunch of robots who are just robotically making money and going through life and dying. But the bottom line is that, as people are, if you want to engage in marriage and you want to invest in marriage, you have to care about feelings. You have to empathize with each other. God forbid you do that. God forbid you learn how to do your partner's love language. No, most people have to. If I personally like intimacy, then the way that I love you is I'm going to give you intimacy. Even if your love language is spending time together, even if your love language is words of affirmation, I'm going to give you empathy because that's what, or I'm going to give you sex because that's what I need. I'm just going to love you the way I need to be loved. That's how selfish people are. If you're going to marry somebody, you better learn their love language and you better learn how to deliver it pretty damn good if you want to have a happy life, because that is the pathway to their heart. And if you're going to be married, you better learn the love language and you better get damn good at it and stop saying, I'm not good at that. Get over yourself. Learn the love language. All right, we're going to take a break. We're going to come right back. Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're talking about marriage throughout history. One of the things that we have to understand is the adult brain only forms once in your life. So if you're a parentified child where your parents made you make adult decisions when you were very, very young, that means your EQ is probably equivalent to the age in which you had to become an adult, because a lot of kids lose their childhood at that point and they have to think like an adult. So the joy in their life escapes their body, and now they have to turn into little serious people trying to survive and being held accountable for adult decisions, and their teachers all loving them because they're so mature. And what they do is they reinforce the trauma that they're going through by calling them mature instead of understanding that they have to be mature because of the idiot parents that they have. So people come into marriage with the brain, whenever it was formed, with the maturity of the brain from the age in which they were parentified. The day that you had to become an adult is the age in which your brain operates. And when two people get married and you've got a 12-year-old brain and you have a 9-year-old brain, what you're going to have is a three-ring Circus Olay performance that goes on and on and on while they breed with each other and have children and try to act like they know what the hell they're doing, and they just end up destroying each other's lives. You have to understand that you have to mature during marriage. You have to take accountability for your behaviors during marriage. So you have to evolve your adult brain from 12 years old into an adult, into a real adult, a married adult. You have to adapt. You have to continue to evolve. That is what marriage is about. If we go back in history, marriage was not invented in a single moment, but evolved over thousands of years. The earliest recorded marriage ceremonies date back to 2350 BC in Mesopotamia. And it was established as a practical tool to forge family alliances, secure property rights, and ensure biological heirs. Before this, clans lived in more loosely organized groups. And as early societies transitioned to agriculture, the need for stable social structures arose, and the need to have children also arose, because if your farm was going to survive, you had to have kids. So, property and wealth. Families used marriage to transfer land, to consolidate wealth, establish political treaties, paternal certainty. In patriarchal societies, marriage bound a woman to a man to guarantee that his children were his biological heirs. Labor and child rearing. Structuring families provided a reliable division of labor and a framework for raising children. Love is a modern concept. The idea of marrying for romantic love is relatively recent, mostly taking root in Western society in the last couple of centuries. So anthropologists and historians often agree that these early systems were highly unequal, often treating women as property as a means to produce legitimate offspring. And over the millennia, the institution evolved from a property and survival arrangement into legally and socially recognized bonds between people. But what you have to understand in this life, if you're going to be happily married, is there is no such thing as fairness and justice. You are a participant in marriage. You have to fill whatever role is required. You are not a victim. You are not a whiner. You are a participant. That is what you have to be. And if both people are participants on the same team, they will help each other succeed. You know, humans have sought out relationships since the earliest days of Homo sapiens. Getting married, that's something our ancestors didn't have in mind. Marriage is an institution is likely only several thousand years old. And you know, historically, making it just a small blip on the age of humanity, if you really look at it, we're about 300,000 years old. And while marriage might seem a time-honored tradition, the idea of people spending their lives together in a legal union only emerged in recent centuries. Now, let me give you a sense of Christianity. So, when a woman walks down the aisle, that is what God did for Abraham. When she wears a white dress and a veil, that is because all Abraham could see was the light of God. He could not see God's face. If he saw God's face, he would die. The woman walks down the aisle, which is the covenant. In the walking down the aisle, the sacrifice is one family on one side and another family on the other side, the father giving the bride away. That is, you cleave your family and cleave to each other. So that means you're forming a new life and you're leaving your past behind you. The man is standing at the altar. As the man stands at the altar and the woman stand at the altar, they give vows to each other. That is meant to be the only covenant you have on the planet Earth. That covenant is meant to teach you where you stand with God by how you handle your covenant. So if you're a jerk to your spouse, you're being a jerk to God, and that should pretty much tell you where you stand with God. So if you die, get an idea what's going to happen based on how you treat your spouse. Because that covenant is teaching you how to love God. That's what it's there for. This goes all the way back to Adam and Eve and the accountability for each other. When you have children, how you treat your children is how you believe that God loves you. So you learn how God loves you by how you treat your children. Your marriage is meant to be a 24 by 7 sanctuary of your life. How you regard your marriage has to do with your entire outcome of your life. That is in Christianity what marriage is about. You need to understand that if you're going to go into the covenant and you're going to be a Christian. The other thing you need to understand is historically, throughout the ages, all the way around the world, the one thing that a woman measures the marriage on as to whether it's satisfactory or not is, am I cherished? Can't be the man I am without her. Don't even know why she's with me. Lucky to have her. She's my best friend. I love talking about her when I'm with her and when I'm not with her. If a woman is not cherished, she wonders, why did I marry this turd? Why would I be with this man the rest of my life who does not cherish me? Because if I breed with him, I sacrifice my body. I have to put it all back together. Pray to God he's still attracted to whatever's left. I sacrifice my career. All this is right off the bat. Sacrifice my career, my dreams for him. And then I have to hope that he still cherishes me. But no, he cherishes his golf game and he cherishes his friends and he cherishes his alcohol and he cherishes his job. But he doesn't cherish me. And I'm over here breeding like a, you know, breeding dog and getting no respect whatsoever. And while this guy is out there roaming the hills like a free range chicken doing whatever he wants to do. Well, if you're going to be that kind of husband, don't expect to be much of a married person. If you're going to take your wife for granted and understand and not understand how much she sacrificed for the marriage immediately, rather than you sacrificing over a long period of the marriage, she had to sell the store right off the bat while you are just doing a whole lot of things to support it until you end up being, a bigger part of the kid's life as they get older. But the bottom line is, if you're going to take your wife for granted like that, after she busts her body into pieces and then has to put it back together and pray to God you're still attracted to it, you are a jerk. You are a child. You need to get off your ass and turn into an adult and understand that you need to give your wife respect. You need to cherish her first, not your golf game, not your video games, not your best friends, not your cup of beer. You need to cherish your wife. If you want to be happily married, if you want to have less stress in your life, you better get to know that word. If you're going to be married to a man, historically, all the way around the world, you better know one thing. If you don't respect him, you have demasculated him. So, what is respect? Respect is having a voice. Does that mean you agree with him? Hell no. What it means is you know what to buy him at the store. I wouldn't buy it for me, but I know what he likes. You have to know what he likes. You have to understand him. You have to hear him. If you are one of these, I know everything and you are just wrong and you're just stupid, I'm just raising my husband. If you're one of these idiots, you're probably not a great spouse. But the bottom line is if you don't know how to respect your husband is not going to cherish you. He's going to want to run for the hills and eventually breed with somebody else, even if you bred with him 5,000 times and had 5,000 kids. He doesn't care because you don't respect him. If he has no voice with you, if he is not, and I know what every woman's saying, oh, he has a voice with me. I hear everything. No, you don't. You know you don't. Many of you don't. Many of you are jerks who only hear what you want to hear, and you have your narratives, and that's about all you care about. But the bottom line is if you want to have a healthy marriage, you better learn how to respect your husband. And if you're going to be married to a woman, you better know how to cherish her. Because if you do that throughout the ages of the human race, that is proven from 30,000 feet. If you get that right, you're going to get a lot of other things in the right place. Marriage was a primary purpose was to bind a woman to a man, and thus guarantee that a man's children were truly his biological heirs. This was particularly important in the patriarchal societies where the heirs would often inherit leadership roles. Through marriage, a woman became a man's property. In the betrothal ceremony in ancient Greece, a father would hand over his daughter with these words: I pledge my daughter for the purpose of producing legitimate offspring. Yes, that is the purpose of marriage back then. In ancient Rome, marriage was seen as a practical means to a sensible end in order to transfer property, wealth, rights, responsibilities, alliances through generations. We can tie our families together by this marriage. In the ancient Hebrews, men were free to take several wives. Married Greek and Roman men were free to satisfy their sexual urges with concubines, prostitutes, even teenage male lovers. Yuck. While their wives were required to stay home and tend to the household. If wives failed to produce offspring, their husbands could give them back and marry someone else. The Christian church became a very powerful institution in Europe. The blessings of a priest became increasingly common. And through the years, there have been differing views about whether weddings are primarily religious or secular events. The church stayed out of weddings and let the state handle the union of man and woman. But in the 8th century, Christian churches started to perform the weddings. Why? Because they started to understand that the Bible had a lot to say about how to conduct yourself in a marriage. While some religions may view marriage differently, they often share similar characteristics. Marriage is highly valued in the Jewish culture, and the wedding is one of the most important events in the life cycle. As a matter of fact, it's the dumbest thing you can do financially to yourself to marry someone and get divorced. Marriage is the dumbest contract you will ever sign in your life. The dumbest contract you will ever sign. If you are a person who has to have everything your way when you get married and you get divorced after divorce, no matter how wealthy you're going to be, you're going to be dividing your income over the years, and eventually you're going to have nothing. You're going to be living in a trailer in some backwoods in Kentucky. Beyond religion, varying cultures have also unique customs when it comes to marriage. In Scotland, a tradition called the blackening occurs when friends and family seize the engaged couple and gunk them with anything from rotten eggs to fish guts to manure and molasses. And certain Chinese provinces, there's a ceremonial practice involving sobbing and singing by the bride and her family, where the bride may cry intermittently and with her tears seen as an expression of gratitude. There's been a lot of variability of what marriage is about, but the bottom line is you need to have respect for the institution if you want it to work. You need to have respect for the role that you are in the marriage. If you are married to a woman, you better learn how to be a good husband to a woman. You may not like the person you're married to, but you need to treat her as your wife. If you are married to a man, you need to treat him as a husband. And I'm saying if you want to make it work. Now, if there's abuse, there's horrible things happening, I'm not endorsing that. You know what the laws are. You know that you can get divorced. Yes, yes, yes. I'm not suggesting that staying with some abusive idiot is a good idea. But I'm saying if you are bringing a bad attitude to your marriage, you're not helping things. If you learn how to be a good spouse, learn how to be accountable as being a good spouse for each other, you guys will want more of that and less of the conflict. That's our show. I want to thank you for listening. I love hearing from you. You can do that on our webpage, voiceamericamedia.com, libsyn.com, libsyn.com, Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. Now remember, marry someone who likes a different cereal so they won't eat all of yours. Also, marriage gives you the power to annoy one person for the rest of your life. Also, keep your eyes wide open before marriage and half shut after. Thank you for listening.